The American Constitution Society was founded in 2001 to promote the vitality of the U.S. Constitution and the fundamental values that it expresses: individual rights and liberties, equality, access to justice, democracy, and the rule of law. We now face the greatest challenge to those values in living memory. When ACS was founded, we had what we then thought was a dangerously conservative Supreme Court. 7 of the 9 justices had been appointed by Republican presidents, and the court had just decided Bush versus Gore. But as we now look to the future, we see a Supreme Court that includes Clarence Thomas, John Roberts, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. We now live in a world with a rock-solid majority of arch-conservative justices who make the conservative court of 2001 look downright heavenly. Inspired by discussions and debates at last year's Legal Legends Luncheon, my colleague at the University of Chicago, David Strauss, and I just finished writing a new book titled Democracy and Equality: The Enduring Constitutional Vision of the Warren Court, which will be published in December. We wrote this book, which is meant to be accessible even to non-lawyers, both to mark the 50th anniversary of the end of the Warren Court and to remind Americans what the Supreme Court can and should represent for our nation. The Warren Court declared racial segregation unconstitutional. It declared school prayer unconstitutional. It created a robust protection for free speech in cases like New York Times versus Sullivan. It helped to put an end to the McCarthy era. It guaranteed the principle of one person, one vote. It ensured that poor criminal defendants would have access to counsel, that illegally seized evidence could not be introduced against the victim of the illegal search, that criminal defendants would receive Miranda warnings to protect their privilege against compelled self-incrimination, and on and on and on. The justices of the Warren Court understood that the central responsibility of the judiciary in interpreting and applying the Constitution is to prevent corruption of our political process and to protect the rights of those whose rights are most likely to be dismissed by those in positions of power. In short, the Warren Court protected the rights of those who were most vulnerable and protected and reinforced the most central tenets of our democracy. The justices of the Warren Court would never have held that affirmative action is unconstitutional, that laws regulating the impact of money in the political process are unconstitutional, that laws reasonably regulating guns are unconstitutional, or that the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional. And they would never have held that rampant political gerrymandering is constitutional, that the Trump Muslim ban is constitutional, or that laws providing radically unequal distribution of funds to students in public schools is constitutional. Although arrogantly tossing out references to originalism, judicial restraint, and calling balls and strikes, the current rock-solid majority on the Supreme Court fools no one. They were chosen with one purpose and one purpose only: to turn the United States Supreme Court into an institution dedicated to distorting the norms and values of our Constitution in order to achieve the political goals of the Republican Party. At this moment and into the future, we need the American Constitution Society more than ever. We need to stand up for a principled understanding of our Constitution, one that protects the rights of minorities, that protects the right to vote, that protects the fundamental right of women to decide for themselves whether or not to bear a child, that protects the rights of gays and lesbians and transgender persons and African Americans and immigrants, that protects the rights and liberties of our people, of all of our people. This is a fight we must fight. And in the future, I can promise you that ACS will help us fight that fight aggressively, courageously, and boldly, for ourselves, for our children, and for our children's children. And that is why we are here today. But now it is time for me to take a deep breath, to clear my head, and to turn to the positive and energizing privilege of recognizing those members of the Chicago legal community we honor today. First, it is my great privilege to present our 2019 Ruth Goldman Award. Ruth Goldman worked in legal aid through most of her career, and she played a pivotal role in the founding of our ACS chapter in Chicago. Ruth died in 2008 at the age of 87, months after seeing the award in her name established. The Ruth Goldman Award is designed both to celebrate the achievements of women leaders of the Chicago legal community, and to encourage women lawyers to champion the ideals of the American Constitution Society. It is my great honor to present our 2019 Ruth Goldman Award to my angel Cody. The proud granddaughter of a Southern sharecropper, my angel first visited someone on death row when she was only 19 years old. She has, she says, never been the same since. When she was young, her mother always told her that she would always get herself in trouble with her mouth. Fulfilling that prediction, my angel has made a career, she says, of starting good trouble. And indeed she has. Before becoming a lawyer, my angel spent 7 years as a capital defense investigator, listening to the stories on death row of inmates in Louisiana and Georgia. That experience gave her the conviction that both our core national values and our Constitution demand the highest caliber of representation for those with the least financial means, especially when their freedom or their lives are at stake. That's why she became a lawyer. After earning her JD from Emory in 2004, my angel served as a law clerk for Judge Myron Thompson in the Federal District Court for the Middle District of Alabama, and then for Judge Ann Claire Williams on the United States Court of Appeals here for the Seventh Circuit. My angel then spent 2 years as a litigator at Schiff Hardin before joining the Federal Defenders in Chicago, where she worked as an assistant federal defender from 2008 to 2017. In that capacity, my angel won presidential clemency and freedom for 5 persons serving life sentences and defended hundreds of defendants in federal court, achieving many courtroom victories from jury acquittals to significantly reduced sentences to successful federal appeals. Then in 2017, my angel founded and serves as head counsel for the Decarceration Collective, an organization of women lawyers dedicated to fighting to free people banished to life in prison for drug offenses and to end the policies that put them there. The Decarceration Collective not only represents such people, but also amplifies their voices and works to improve their lives and ultimately to put an end to the unjust and immoral criminal justice system. My angel, I am truly delighted to present you with ACS's 2019 Ruth Goldman Award for your extraordinary service to our community.
Thank you. So last week, I watched a television station and saw a screaming, vitriol crowd chanting. There were Americans, no less, chanting, "Send her back, send her back, send her back." And that night, I wrote a love letter to Representative Abdullahi Omar, and I wrote a love letter to my younger self. And I wrote a love letter to a young Ruth Goldman, and I wrote a letter to every woman who had been told to go back to where she came from. I wrote a love letter to Black women who had been told to sit at the back of the bus. I wrote a love letter to every woman, cisgendered and transgendered, who had endured workplace violence and sexual harassment and who had been told to take back her story. And I wrote a love letter to every girl in every corner of this planet who had shown up to a classroom and been told to go back home because education was no place for her. And that love letter said to be strong and be proud and be afraid and cry and be disappointed and then get proud again and get strong again and to stare down defeat and to keep cutting concrete with your keyboard because one day soon we will shift the paradigm. And that love letter said that you don't need a deep baritone voice to be heard in courtrooms around this country, because as we all know, the register of justice is high-pitched. And you don't have to wear a skirt to those on-campus interviews, contrary to what I was told by that career counselor in law school. And gendering is simply a construct, and one day soon the paradigm will shift. So hold dear, daughters, hold on to your sisters, hold on to your mothers, hold on to your wives, hold on to your partners. Keep showing up, keep standing up, keep speaking up, because I believe in the future of this profession as lawyers. I believe in this space, I believe in this place, and I believe in this Constitution. And to every woman in this room, I say to you, turn your light up. And when it feels like it's blinding everyone around you, turn it up even further still. Because we are as necessary as the beta rays of the sun. I am the daughter of Audrey Denise Cody. I am the granddaughter of a Missouri sharecropper named Sadie Mae Robinson. I am the granddaughter of a Mississippi civil rights worker. Her name is Pearline Butler Cody. Thank you to the American Constitution Society for this award. Thank you to every woman whose survivorship and whose shoulders I stand on. Thank you for walking and marching forward and for linking arms, because as we know, there is no going back. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Thank you.
It is now my great pleasure to introduce this afternoon's keynote speaker, the infamous Jill Wine-Banks. After earning her JD from Columbia in 1968, Jill joined the Department of Justice, becoming the first woman ever to serve in the Organized Crime Division. 4 years later, because of her extraordinary record as a trial lawyer, she was selected as one of 3 assistant Watergate special prosecutors in the obstruction of justice trial against President Nixon's Attorney General, his Chief of Staff, and his Chief Domestic Advisor. Jill was also a major player in the in the Watergate tapes hearing, in which she cross-examined Rosemary Woods, President Nixon's secretary, about the critical 18.5-minute gap in a key White House recording. That cross-examination got pretty tough, as Jill demonstrated that Woods could not, as she claimed, have inadvertently erased the critical portion of the tapes. In the sexist spirit of the time, Judge John Sirica, who was presiding, interrupted the proceeding and said, "Now, ladies, we've got enough trouble here. We don't need 2 ladies arguing." Jill also caught a lot of crap in the media at that time because she had the balls to wear a miniskirt. A few years later, in 1977, after President Carter appointed Jill to serve as general counsel to the Army, she played a critical role in the enactment of legislation that abolished the separate Women's Army Corps and for the first time fully integrated women into the armed services. 40 years later, when Jill was appointed by President Obama as Secretary of Defense to lead a congressional inquiry into sexual assault in the military, she was delighted to see that 5 of the 6 generals and admirals involved in the proceeding were women. We'd come a long way, in no small part thanks to Jill. I could go on all afternoon about Jill, but of course I can't. She's had a truly remarkable career, not only in government, but in private practice here in Chicago at Jenner & Block, as the first woman to serve as Chief Operating Officer of the American Bar Association, as Chairman of the Board of Motorola's joint venture company in Russia, as the head of career education for the Chicago Public Schools, as a member of many corporate boards, and as an active member of too many public service organizations to mention. Most of you probably know Jill best these days as an always engaging and illuminating MSNBC legal analyst. In short, Jill has had truly one of the most remarkable legal careers of anyone I've ever known, and I am truly delighted to shut up now and to give the floor to her. Jill Weinbanks.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jeff, for the kind remarks, and to the American Constitution Society for letting me join the pantheon of great speakers who have preceded me, including Jeff. If his opening remarks didn't scare you, and if my angel's remarks didn't inspire you, I hope that I will take you in that direction. Most of you may know me as a consistent voice of reason and moderation in the Trump hearings and in everything that's going on now. I am not an alarmist, but I am alarmed, and I think we all should be. When I finish speaking, I hope you will share my alarm and that you will take action on that you won't be depressed by it, but that you will actually get engaged in trying to save our Constitution, our democracy, and the rule of law, because I think right now we're in an epic battle to save them. I feel threatened in the same way I did when I was reading Winds of War by Herman Wouk many, many, many years ago. Trump has moved one step at a time, slowly eliminating even the pretense of the rule of law. He doesn't abide by any of the rules, and he has the support of the Republican Party as he has reconfigured it, by the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, by his top aides, and he has taken on a total stonewalling of all congressional oversight. He's blocked subpoenas and testimony on false claims of absolute immunity, something that doesn't exist. He tweeted that 4 women members of Congress should go back to their own countries, and then he stood silent as a crowd chanted, "Send her back." I feel confident that I can skip all of the basic facts because I think this audience is one that already knows the basic facts, that you are already informed about what Trump's administration, his campaign, his top leaders have already done. And you know the basic similarities between Watergate and Trumpgate, or Watergate with Russian dressing, as it's known on Twitter. You probably already know why Trump is more dangerous than Richard Nixon ever was, but I want to mention 5 key reasons. One, of course, is the involvement of a foreign hostile power, something that did not exist during Watergate. Second is that there is no longer any semblance of any bipartisanship. We have no more civil discourse. We did during Watergate, and that makes a big difference. The third reason this is worse than Watergate is that the separation of powers and Congress's oversight role has been completely eroded by Trump in a way unimaginable during Watergate. His total stonewalling, his made-up claims of immunity exceed anything that Nixon ever did or contemplated. And I want to point out in that regard that the 3rd article of impeachment against Nixon was contempt of Congress. So there was enough of it under him that it led to a voted article of impeachment, and now we have a president who exceeds anything that Nixon ever did. Fourth, and probably the most significant, is that the fact that Trump is more dangerous because of the emergence of Breitbart and Fox and social media without any fact-checking. I'm going to talk more about that a little later, but before I do, I want to talk about the 5th reason that I think Trump is more dangerous. And that is because although both Nixon and Trump share the belief that they are above the law, unlike Nixon, Trump will never obey the rule of law. Nixon ultimately did comply with the subpoena. He ultimately did believe in the rule of law. I think that it's very scary that we even have to talk about whether Trump will ever obey the law. He's now got an attorney general who has this unique unitary executive position, and he is supporting this completely wrong-headed approach to how the president should behave. He's enabled the president to completely ignore the rules, and so far there have been no consequences for either Trump or Barr. And while many believe that Trump has ignored the law for his entire life, including me, now he's in a position to really control that exact outcome, and that is a very scary thing. I think he has no moral compass to rein him in, and now he doesn't even have a Department of Justice or a Congress that can rein him in. So let's go back to the theory that Trump cannot commit obstruction as put forward by Barr. When you add that theory to the Office of Legal Counsel opinion, you see that the laws actually truly do not apply to the president. And that means that he cannot be impeached or indicted. He can't be impeached because of the Senate's current makeup. He can't be indicted because the Office of Legal Counsel says he can't be indicted. So even though the alternate remedy to indictment is impeachment, it's been taken away from us by the makeup of Congress. And I wonder how we are going to ever be able to hold him accountable. And before I get to whether I think there is a way, I want to look at what can be done other than those two things. And let me start by saying that the Office of Legal Counsel opinion I have believed since 1973 is wrong. It has no basis in law or in the Constitution. I fought for the indictment of Richard Nixon in 1973, 1974, and then he got pardoned, and I fought again before the pardon but after the resignation because he was no longer even a sitting president. Unfortunately, the pardon came so fast, and Leon Jaworski was hesitant to agree that he should be indicted because he felt that it would delay the trial of all the other defendants and that that would not be a good thing. We were all willing to wait and try the case whenever it came up because there would have been a delay. It seemed unfair to me that Richard Nixon, the leader of this, the man who set the principles, would get away with the crimes while his underlings would go to jail for it, and that he should be tried. I thought he should be tried before he resigned, but certainly after he should have. In the meantime, I do think that there is a chance that the Senate could be persuaded to vote to convict if there is an impeachment hearing. And that's the important thing, is we need to have public hearings right now with fact witnesses. We need to hear from Don McGahn, from Hope Hicks, from Annie Donaldson, from Corey Lewandowski. Those are the people I want to hear, not the summary that Mueller will present, but from the actual fact witnesses. If you look at what happened during Watergate, you can see that support for the president was at a very high number, way higher than Donald Trump has ever had, and support for impeachment was at a very low number until the hearings started. And then you see a complete reversal. The numbers skyrocket for impeachment, and they fall off the chart for his approval ratings. And that's why public hearings are so important. And I think we need to really push for that. If that doesn't happen, can Trump be held accountable otherwise? Well, one way is to have hearings and just vote a censure. Don't send it to the Senate for a conviction, just let him be censured. That at least is going to get the vote out, get the facts out, and possibly affect the outcome of the 2020 election. So it's worth doing even if there isn't a conviction. The second way is to rely on the state prosecutors and let them bring an indictment. They aren't bound by the Office of Legal Counsel. And because I think obviously their indictment would end up in the Supreme Court, finally we would have an ultimate decision. Admittedly, this is not a court that I would like to be making that decision, but I still hold out hope that they would agree to do this in a fair way. And let them decide whether I'm right that the president can be indicted or whether the Office of Legal Counsel that says he can't is right. And then we might be able to do that. Now, there's a lot of argument about letting states proceed and that you might have multiple indictments of the president, but that's a ridiculous argument. I don't think it's realistic. You have prosecutors who act on facts. They wait until there's substantial evidence. I don't see them going out for political reasons and indicting the president. This president has in plain sight done enough to justify investigating him and possibly indicting him. The Mueller report is much more of a smoking gun than has been admitted. I mean, if anyone has read it, and if you haven't, you should at least read the summary, you will see that there are set forth in front of you not only things about Russia that are something that Congress must take action to stop, but you see 10 specific acts of obstruction, 5 of which even the conservative Mueller admits satisfy all 3 elements of the crime of obstruction. They are indictable. I was one of the 1,000 prosecutors, former federal prosecutors, who signed a letter saying that if we were to be asked, we would indict based on the evidence now public. So I think that's where we should be. I hate to rely on the states, but given the current makeup of the administration, that may be our only choice. And I just want to stress again that I don't think the Office of Legal Counsel is correct and that we need to take it to the Supreme Court and get a decision. Now, whether any of these options will come to pass and whether Trump will be held accountable is, of course, pure speculation. But there are serious risks to doing nothing. And I could list them all, but that would take way longer than I'm allowed. And so I'm going to just point you to a very excellent article by Adam Gentleson, who was the former chief of staff to the former majority leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, and it's in Gentleman's Quarterly, GQ. So if you can find that, just go online, and it's a really good layout of why we must do something. And I share all this with you today not to frighten you, not to make you depressed, but I want to motivate you. I believe that you, who have shown your interest in the Constitution through being here today with the American Constitution Society, are sophisticated and knowledgeable, and that you won't be daunted by the task ahead, that you will be inspired to action. I'm assuming that you get your facts from MSNBC, not from Fox, from the New York Times and not Breitbart, and that you understand the threat to the Constitution and the rule of law that we're on now, and that you will be informed, you will be involved, and you will help get out the vote, because that will make a difference. That was the 3 things that President Obama said right after he returned to Chicago at the Economic Club of Chicago dinner. He said, be informed, be involved, and get out the vote. So now I want to go back to the new media landscape that we're facing, because it really makes Trump more dangerous, and it affects our ability to be informed. Maybe not our ability, because we're getting real facts, but the people who are watching Fox. I mean, during Watergate, we had 3 networks, NBC, ABC, CBS. We all agreed on the facts. We debated what they meant, but we didn't debate that all the tables in this room are round. We agreed that they were round. Today, that isn't the case. And where you have Fox News and you have viewers who hear only Fox News, that's what they believe. And we can't break through that bubble somehow. That's what we need to do. Trump has deliberately amplified the divisions in our country. He says, believe only me, and people do. He and Barr said that the Mueller report was a complete exoneration. That's totally false. You don't have to read very much of it to know that that is false. I don't believe that anyone who's read it believes that. I don't even believe that Barr or Trump believe that, because it's so blatantly obvious that it isn't. But they keep saying it, and they're very good at the propaganda, and all of the supporters of Trump, all of the viewers of Fox, accept that is true. You have a person who was at the Amash town hall who said, I listened to Fox and I had absolutely no idea that there was anything negative in the Mueller report. But when she heard it from Amash, a Republican, she actually came to believe it. And I think we can't allow this to keep going. Barr was very clever in withholding the full report, in issuing his summary, and then his slightly longer summary, and then his press conference, and then waiting hours before the actual report rebutted everything he had said at his press conference. But first impressions are very hard to undo, and people believe them, and many people listened to him, and they said, oh, well, now I know, so I don't have to listen to any more. People who listened to Mueller, who clearly was not saying what Barr said, may have a different opinion, but that's not what the people on Fox heard. And I'm afraid that tomorrow's testimony may not change any of that. And I say that for three reasons. One, Mueller, unfortunately, is not a compelling witness. He's an unwilling witness. He is recalcitrant at best. He will be testifying for way fewer hours than I think is necessary, and he talks in a fairly arcane way so that he doesn't get his points across, and that's a problem. The second reason it's not going to make a difference is because everybody in this room probably already believes what I believe, but the people who are listening to Fox don't believe that, and they aren't going to hear him because there is no way that Fox is going to broadcast all of what he is saying. They will broadcast the Republicans diverting attention from the facts and talking about their conspiracy theories, about the sexting between members of the FBI, about the conflict that supposedly Mueller has. That's what will be covered by Fox. And so if you don't hear Mueller, you can't be persuaded by him, even if he were more persuasive. But even if they did hear him, they would also then hear Trump's 6-word summary, which is no collusion, no obstruction, full exoneration. And the Democrats don't have a rebuttal. They have not yet developed a clear and concise message that can rebut that. They need that message as much as anything else. They need a clip of Mueller, and therefore they need very clear, concise questions, which will lead to an excerpt that says, and I'm going to quote what I wish he would say, I did not exonerate the president. There is evidence of numerous acts of criminal obstruction by Trump, but I was barred from indicting him by the Office of Legal Counsel opinion. The evidence is overwhelming that Russia interfered in our 2016 election and that Trump and his campaign welcomed it. The lies and wholesale non-cooperation by Trump and his cohorts left my investigation incomplete. That should convey exactly what this report in 448 pages says. It's the truth. It is the fact. Read it and you will know that that's right. But somehow we have to get that message out. And getting those statements out from Mueller, who has a credibility with the public, is much more important than hearing Democrats or MSNBC analysts saying those words. My saying it won't persuade any Trump supporters. Maybe Mueller would. Maybe if we had the hearings and they heard Don McGahn say what Mueller says in his report, they would believe Don McGahn, clearly a special favorite Republican of the president. That's why we need those hearings. You can't have a democracy without facts. In the free marketplace of ideas is where you get truth, and you need a free press to disseminate those facts. We do have a free press, but Democrats and Republicans live in two different media bubbles. You have photos of the inauguration showing a small crowd from Trump and a huge crowd for Obama. But all of the people who watch Fox believe that those are photoshopped, and that there was a big crowd and that the press is deliberately deceiving them. That's why we need to have public hearings, and they can't be behind closed doors. But imagine if there wasn't a Fox News, if the current political climate was without Fox, and if there was a continued national attention to fact-based news instead of what Fox calls news. What if the country today was informed by Walter Cronkite or Huntley Brinkley instead of Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham? Or alternatively, what if Fox existed in 1974 and 40% of the country was continually told that the tapes were fabricated, that the FBI and CIA were steeped in deep state conspiracy and had their primary objective was to get rid of the president? If Fox News existed in 1974, Richard Nixon may well have served out his second term. And Rosemary Woods may have told Sean Hannity that it was me who erased the tapes. And people would have believed it. So, I wasn't part of a deep state conspiracy, and neither is the current FBI or CIA. But if Fox existed back then, 40% of the country would not have seen John Dean, and if it did not exist today, I believe impeachment hearings would have already started and we would have already heard Don McGahn testify. Trump has done what Hitler did through propaganda. He has made his supporters into a cult who believe anything he says, and that is a danger. If you saw the live televised inauguration, you know he's lying. Just as he was lying when he said he saw millions of people celebrating on 9/11. These are lies that have continued throughout his life, and we have to take steps to rebut it. He says, I tried to stop the chant, but you saw him on television stand at the podium and revel in the chant. He remained silent for 13 seconds. That's a long time. And however bad Watergate was, it was not the threat to democracy and the Constitution that we now face. Watergate was called a constitutional crisis, but compared to where we are now, I can't even talk about it in the same sentence. I don't know if we're at a constitutional conflict or crisis, or whether the Constitution has already collapsed right now. We need to find solutions before it's too late, and that is why the debate about whether to start impeachment right now is so important. I'm going to Washington immediately after this, not just for the Mueller, but to meet with members of Congress who are interested in talking about impeachment. And I've had the pleasure of meeting with Representative Nadler, Chairman Nadler, and I know that he's serious, and we need to show support for them so that we can get this done. I'm hopeful that we will find a solution before we turn to the ballot box in 2020. And even though I don't expect a lot of drama or new revelations from Mueller tomorrow, I want to leave you with the thought that facts matter and that I have hope from a juror in the Manafort case, Paula Duncan, who is a strong Trump supporter, a loyal person who believes that the investigation by Mueller was a hoax and a witch hunt. But she said, I voted to convict Manafort on all 18 counts because I heard the evidence, and the facts proved that he was guilty on all 18 counts. And I'm hoping that all of the people wearing MAGA hats will hear the testimony and that they too will be like Paula Duncan and they will accept the truth of what is in front of them and that they too will turn to support the Constitution just like you all do. So thank you, and I hope I've left you with a little bit of hope, but motivated you to action as well. Thank you.
So, hello everybody. I'm Caroline Fredrickson. I'm the president of ACS, and it's always a delight to be back at home in Chicago, and always amazing and inspiring to see the awardees every year and to hear the great keynote talks that we hear every year. Jill's was sobering, but also an important call to action and a reminder, I think, for all of us of exactly how important the American Constitution Society really is. Without an organization like this, without gatherings like this across the country, chapters like the one in Chicago, members engaged like you, people of good conscience who believe in those values that Jeff laid out, the core values that we find in that Constitution. Without all of you, there would be so much more to fear. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Jill, for giving us that call to action. And thank you all so much for supporting this incredible luncheon. This is the 14th annual Legal Legends Luncheon. And thanks to Jeff, of course, for always being such a wonderful MC, being such a terrific leader for ACS, and Rebecca for planning and ensuring that today would be such an incredible success. And of course, we are very, very grateful for the leadership of the Lawyer Chapter co-chairs, Dan Cotter, Candace Klein, and Dana Pono. The Chicago Lawyer Chapter was one of ACS's first chapters and supported initially by legends such as Abner Mikva and Ruth Goldman, and many of you here in the room who have been dedicated to the cause since the founding of ACS. I'm so glad that we can honor Judge Mikva and Ruth Goldman's legacies here today with these awards. So I know my job is to give you a little taste of some of the things going on at ACS around the country. And it seems like a long list, but I assure you it's only a small part of what we're up to, because unfortunately, this particular time in our history presents a lot of work for those of us who are dedicated to rule of law and the constitutional rights that we believe in. So of course, our chapters, the very heart and soul of ACS. We have over 200 chapters nationwide, including a new at-large chapter for those who don't live in an area where there's an existing chapter. And we have newly revived chapters in Indiana, New Orleans, Phoenix, Sacramento, and Wyoming. We have active student chapters at almost every single law school, including every single law school in the great state of Illinois. So thank you. Give it up for Illinois. And our chapters go on to do an incredible amount of work, including hosting more than 1,500 events in the past year, including chapter events, regional convenings, a student convention, and our national convention. And we have an upcoming national lawyer convening October 17th through 19th in Atlanta, and we hope to see you all there. We remain, of course, committed to a fair and independent judiciary, and we have stepped up in response to the challenge presented by President Trump's fast-paced judicial nominations, who are quickly remaking the federal judiciary in the model of the justices on the Supreme Court, except not as qualified, typically. We are partnering with many nonprofits to help protect voting rights, including a collaboration monitoring election activity in 5 states. And following the success of the Northwestern ACS students here in Chicago in 2016, ACS has been working with a lot of our chapters across the country where the students are asking their universities to cancel classes and promote civic engagement on Election Day. Since 2017, ACS has been building a strong infrastructure for state attorneys general through our state AG project. State AGs will continue to play a critical role in protecting the rule of law, and ACS is proud to have built a coalition ready to tackle the many issues we face. And we're partnering with the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, also known as CREW, to develop and disseminate legal analysis on the various investigations surrounding President Trump and his campaign. President Trump, as you know, has made immigration a central focus of his agenda from day one, and ACS has been activating our network at every juncture to help protect the most vulnerable in our country. And our network is engaged through the Constitution in the classroom and community, teaching hundreds of students about their constitutional rights and responsibilities. In addition, our network has helped to staff nearly 100 volunteer projects in the past year. And finally, one thing I'm especially reminded of when I look at all of you is our pipeline work. Since ACS's inception, we have consistently helped lawyers and law students who share our values secure jobs and connect with the leaders best able to guide them in the process. As our chapters have grown in size and influence, we've also increased our focus on identifying excellent progressive lawyers to fill influential positions, especially in the judiciary. The right has deftly dismantled progressive victories by empowering conservative legislatures and political figures to advance judicial candidates who will uphold cases that promote their policies at the state and federal levels. We too need to engage as actively, more so, to ensure that there is a pool of legal professionals ready and willing to support and uphold rule of law and constitutional values, whether it is now, in 2021, or 20 years in the future. So as you can see, and as many of you know firsthand, ACS has been busy. And we are facing these challenging times head on. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your support. And thank you, Jeff, for being such a great MC and for continuing on with our amazing program. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jill, for that amazing, inspiring, and depressing talk. And thank you, Caroline, for all you do in your leadership of the American Constitution Society. I should note that Caroline has a new book, The Democracy Fix, How to Win the Fight for Fair Rules, Fair Courts, and Fair Elections. I highly recommend it. It's a terrific analysis with a surprisingly positive view about how we can, in fact, protect our democracy as we go forward. Now, however, it's time to turn to the Abner J. Mikva Awards. In the history of this event, we have recognized more than 40 legal legends. They include such esteemed figures as Ab Mikva, Newt Minow, Valerie Jarrett, James Montgomery, Ron Miller, Lowell Sakanoff, and Lori Lightfoot, to name just a few. In 2017, in honor of Ab Mikva, whose life and career exemplified in every way the model of an ACS legal legend, we named this award the Abner J. Mikva Award. It's now my privilege to introduce two of our three recipients of the 2019 Abner J. Mikva Award. In the late 1960s, as the coal mines in Appalachia were closing down, there was a huge migration from the coal fields to Chicago. As the former coal miners got older, they began to have problems from black lung disease. They applied for disability benefits and health care, but were told, "We don't know anything about black lung. Go back to Appalachia." In 1975, a group of former coal miners and their widows founded the Uptown People's Law Center in a desperate effort to secure treatment for black lung disease for disabled miners. Several years later, Alan Mills, while still a law student at Northwestern, started volunteering at UPLC. After graduating from Northwestern, Alan joined UPLC, first as a staff attorney, then as legal director, and now as UPLC's executive director. Under Alan's leadership, over the years, UPLC has developed a diverse docket, including public benefits litigation, landlord-tenant work, and prisoners' civil rights. Alan is currently pursuing 7 major class action cases alleging that prisoners in Illinois are denied adequate mental health treatment in violation of our Constitution. The prisons, Alan maintains, treat mental illness as a disciplinary matter rather than as a medical issue. Alan is especially engaged with litigation against supermax prisons, which are particularly insensitive to the needs of prisoners. In one illustrative case, for example, a man in jail for burglary received a 7-year sentence. With good behavior, he would have been out in 3.5 years. But he is severely mentally ill and got a lot worse while he's been in prison. As a result, he does things like spit on guards and throw feces at them. Because of that behavior, he now has a 99-year sentence, even though his behavior was clearly due to mental illness. These are the sorts of people Alan Mills represents every day. Indeed, under Alan's leadership, UPLC has developed the largest docket in the state of Illinois of civil rights cases filed on behalf of Illinois prisoners. It is my great honor to present the 2019 Abner J. Mikva Award to Alan Mills. Sorry. Getting this shit out of the way. Congratulations, Alan. Thank you so much.
Everybody wants a picture, right? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So for someone who spent the last 40 years representing prisoners, I have to tell you, I don't believe in second chances. I don't believe in rehabilitation. You may find this surprising, but let me introduce you to Molly. I visited Molly a couple weeks ago. She was released from prison about 4 weeks ago. At the age of 2, Molly's mother gave birth to a second child. That child tested positive for drugs. So DCFS came in and took away both children from her mom. Molly spent the rest of her childhood, group homes, foster homes, shelters, homeless, began cutting, developed serious mental illness, developed a very serious drug addiction. As a child, she was molested by one foster father. As a teen, she was raped by a second foster father, who, by the way, got out of prison a couple weeks before Molly did. Most stable home she ever had was at about the age of 15 when she went to live with her father, who used his house to cook meth. But at least he wasn't homeless, he wasn't being evicted. At the age of 21, she was homeless, drug addicted. Police came and rousted her like they do so many homeless people. She didn't passively get arrested, she resisted. She ended up with a felony aggravated battery charge against that police officer. When she was taken to county jail, still high, she sprinkled what she thought was holy water on one of the guards who was processing her in. She got a second aggravated felony battery against the police officer. When she got to the IDOC, she got into a fight with a guard about whether or not she was allowed in the day room, and got a third aggravated battery felony charge. So total, she spent 6.5 years in prison, most of it in solitary. Unsurprisingly, she didn't get better in solitary. The cutting got a lot worse. Her arms are now fully scarred up, foreign objects inserted in her arms, her legs. Then she got a letter from her foster father who had raped her. He sent her a picture of the room where he raped her while she was still in prison. It re-traumatized her, but she was already in a crisis cell, so she had no way to hurt herself. When they put her on the yard, she climbed the fence and used the barbed wire at the top to slice her abdomen open. She finally got released on parole. Molly doesn't need a second chance. She never had a first chance. We hear about rehabilitation, where people have to learn to make better choices. They're in prison because they made bad choices. I ask you, what bad choice did Molly make? We have our 7 class action cases because, unfortunately, we talk about Trump and the rule of law. Well, prisons have been a place where we haven't had a rule of law for decades. It's largely a lawless place. And that's our job as the lawyers, is to bring some rule of law in behind the prison walls. I visited hundreds of prisoners face-to-face at Cellfront and on legal visits over the last 40 years. And I can tell you, Molly is not unique. Our prisons are full of people who are traumatized, people suffering from addiction, survivors of childhood abuse, survivors of sexual abuse, survivors of domestic partner abuse, and severely mentally ill people. We in Illinois have some of the very worst prisons in the country. Our experts tell us that while it's a nice blue state and we think that we're a nice liberal state, we're in hot competition with Alabama for having the worst prisons in the country. Our maximum security prisons are ancient. Menard Correctional Center, where I was last week, was started during the Civil War and finished in the 1920s. Pontiac Correctional Center opened in 1920. Stateville Correctional Center later in the 1920s. That's our 3 maximum security prisons. Stateville in 1970 was declared to be past its useful life and should be closed down. Instead, we put twice as many people in it, and it's still operating today. At Martin Correctional Center, where I was last Thursday, 2 people live in a cell 4.5 by 10 feet. That's smaller than almost all of your bathrooms. 2 people can stand up in that cell, but they can't both move around at the same time. Many of those cells have solid doors, not bars like you see on TV, but a solid steel door. They don't have windows. They get no fresh air. When I was down there last week, it was 96 degrees outside in the parking lot. Inside the cells, it was over 110 degrees. What's truly remarkable, though, is the way people find to resist inside prisons. How they find creative ways to advocate for themselves. How they find creative ways to tell their own stories. Some of the strongest, most creative people I have met in the last 40 years have been locked behind bars. The talent that this country has that's locked away is appalling. I submit that most people in prison do not need to be rehabilitated. They do not need to learn how to make better choices. Society needs to be rehabilitated so that people like Molly have better choices to make. UPLC is a tiny organization. We only have 3 lawyers, less than $1 million per year in our budget. We're always struggling to raise money. So how do we do all this work? Because we partner with pro bono lawyers. Lawyers like people in this room, in fact, some of the lawyers in this room have partnered with us. It's important to know that all of us that have a law license have a privilege that most people in society do not have. We have the privilege of going into prisons. If Joe Blow off the street knocks on a prison door and says, "Hey, I'd like to come in and see some prisoners," they say, "Sorry, go away." If you have a law license and you have a client inside, you have the absolute right to go in and talk to them. So I urge you to use that privilege. Take a prisoner case, meet a prisoner, learn what they go through on a daily basis, get to know your clients. I guarantee you that once you see the conditions in a prison, you'll never be able to unsee them. You won't be able to ignore what we as society do to our fellow human beings. So I thank ACS for this award. It really is an honor. But without the hundreds of prisoners behind bars who have entrusted me with their stories, with their legal claims, over the last 40 years, I would not be standing here today. The real heroes of this story are the people behind bars who find a way to resist. Thank you very much.
Judge Patricia Logue grew up in Philadelphia in a family that was devoted to social justice. In 1986, Pat earned her law degree from Northwestern, where she came out as gay for the first time. The mid-'80s was still a pretty daring time for a law student to come out, and it was quite courageous of Pat to reveal her true self, even if only cautiously, at this time. After graduating, Pat worked at Jenner & Block for a few years, and then moved on to BPI, Business and Professional People for the Public Interest, where she worked with another legal legend, Alex Polikoff, on public housing discrimination. Then in 1993, after a bequest from the estate of Robert Bowen Foster enabled the establishment of Lambda Legal's Chicago office, Pat became the founder and managing attorney of that office. Among the many cases Pat has worked on in that capacity was the fight to include the LGBT contingent at Chicago's Bud Billiken Day Parade, a federal court of appeals decision that required public schools to take seriously the abuse of gay and lesbian students, and a pivotal decision that enabled thousands of gay individuals and couples to adopt children. Pat also defended the free speech rights in public universities by securing a victory over conservative students at the University of Wisconsin who tried to defund the LGBT student group. And she successfully represented the Dancing Queens when they were arrested for dancing together in a local bar here in Chicago. Pat also played a central role in several critical Supreme Court cases addressing the rights of gays and lesbians, including most dramatically the Supreme Court's groundbreaking 2003 decision in Lawrence versus Texas. In short, in her 14 years as Lambda Legal, Pat Logue helped change the national landscape of constitutional rights for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, and those with HIV. Then, in 2007, Pat became an associate judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County, a position she has held with courage, integrity, and wisdom. Pat, we would not be where we are today in the realm of LGBTQ rights if it were not for you. You are truly a legal legend. Accepting the Abner J. Mikva Award this afternoon for Pat is Camilla Taylor, Lambda Legal's Director of Constitutional Litigation.
Judge Logue and her spouse, Marcia Feston, have asked me to express gratitude on their behalf to ACS for this prestigious award, and also have given me an opportunity to say a couple of sentences about the continuing impact that Judge Logue has had on her former Lambda Legal colleagues and on the LGBT community at large. Judge Logue, or Pat, as we knew her before she left us to become a judge, was always a bold strategist and a visionary. Pat was the champion of the substantive due process argument in Lawrence versus Texas. As lead attorney on that case, she developed and authored the argument that laws criminalizing sodomy between adults of the same sex violated their fundamental right to form a relationship and be intimate with each other without governmental interference. Her landmark win on this ground not only vindicated the equal dignity of gay people, but paved the way for advocates to seek and win the fundamental right to marry, and helped to fortify the fundamental right to abortion for another generation. Pat's courage and vision reflected her faith in the integrity of the courts and her faith in the ability of her fellow humans to learn from mistakes and become better at recognizing our common humanity. She led us through some of the darkest times of our movement. Today, as our community and so many others are under assault from the federal government, and the integrity of the courts itself is under attack, we need her inspiration and her example all the more. On behalf of Lambda Legal, we are so proud of you, Pat. And on behalf of Judge Logue, thank you to the American Constitution Society for this award and for all that you do.
Good afternoon, and no, you do not need your eyes checked. I am not Jeffrey Stone. My name is Sheldon Namod, and it's my personal pleasure to introduce my former student, Stan Willis, who grew up on the west side of Chicago. When he was 12 years old, he joined the Van Dyke Street Gang and later became the leader of the Gents Street Gang. I'm sure you haven't heard anything like this before in an introduction. After graduating from Crane High School in 1960, he joined the United States Air Force, and when he returned to Chicago 4 years later, he began attending Crane College, where he became a politically active person and led the campaign to rename the new West Side campus Malcolm X College. After completing his AA degree in 1968, Stan transferred to the University of Chicago, where he earned both a BA and a master's degree, studying under one of America's truly great legal historians, John Hope Franklin. Stan later enrolled in the Chicago Kent College of Law, where he was, as I mentioned, a student of mine. Earning his JD in 1983, he then joined the People's Law Office. In his remarkable career as an attorney, Stan has been an active crusader against police violence and has strived to empower communities of color. In 1989, he established his own law firm specializing in civil rights litigation and criminal defense. Over the years, Stan has litigated hundreds of Section 1983 civil rights cases against many municipalities involving abuse by public officials. In 1991, following the infamous televised beating of Rodney King, he organized the African American Defense Committee Against Police Violence. Over the years, Stan has mobilized support for all victims of racial and political oppression, including the numerous victims of COINTELPRO. In 2005, Stan founded the grassroots organization Black People Against Police Torture and led a coalition of lawyers, activists, and community members to internationalize the Chicago police torture cases via a series of international human rights organizations, which helped to bring about justice in the Chicago police torture cases by sparking the indictment of Police Commander John Burge. May he rest in hell. You'll forgive me. On top of all this and much more, Stan has managed to find the time to serve as a frequent lecturer in a broad range of Chicago area schools and civic organizations across the nation. I think it's fair to say that Stan Willis is indeed a legal legend, and it is my great honor to bestow upon him the American Constitution Society's Abner J. Mikva Award. Stan. Take a picture? Hey, man. As they say in Italy, now they call.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Boy, if my mom and dad were still here, they'd be proud of me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. American Constitutional Society, thank you. I will be very brief. My colleagues have said it all. Let's get rid of Trump immediately. And there's a lot to do in the prison industry. When I look back on my development, I grew up on the west side of Chicago. I went to Crane High School, which was not one of the high schools that produced, scholars. Crane High School is still over there. Was the school that had the best basketball players in Chicago, and we were very proud of that. In fact, I tried to get on the team, and they laughed at me. I don't understand to this time why they laughed at me. I was a little shorter than I am now. But what I've learned over the years, coming from the west side of Chicago, the adults that I grew up under had migrated from the South because they thought by coming to Chicago they would get better jobs. And better jobs were jobs in factories. In the South, they were sharecroppers. You all know what sharecroppers are? Everybody's shaking their heads. Sharecroppers basically are people who at one time or another had been enslaved, and when the laws were changed and slavery was stopped, they were told by the owners of all these acres that they could stay there, but they had to build a house and they had to do all the work. Almost another form of enslavement. So my grandparents were sharecroppers. I didn't understand none of that stuff. I would go visit them. They're just my grandparents. If somebody had told me they were sharecroppers, it wouldn't have bugged me at all because I didn't know what that meant. I loved them anyway, sharecroppers or not. But I say all that to say that my parents migrated to the west side of Chicago to get away from the South and to get factory jobs. My mom and dad both were factory workers. My dad worked in factories out in Cicero, and he bought a truck. And he would always say, I don't need a car. I can't make any money with a car. But with a truck, I could take you out to church and then go and make some money with my truck. And that's what he did. We never had a car. For me, it was okay because when I became a teenager, I would borrow the truck and take all my buddies to the movies. I forget the name of the movies that were outside. I don't think they have those anymore, where you actually pull in. You all know what I'm talking about, though. Can you imagine having a truck and getting all your buddies going to one of those kind of movies? I became pretty popular. So this kind of explained that I went to Crane. Crane was not a school of strong academics. When I graduated, I joined the Air Force. And I have to admit, it wasn't because I was so patriotic. My two best friends had joined the military. One went to the Marines, one went to the Army. And they were coming home bragging about all the stuff they were doing. So I wanted to do stuff too. So I joined the Air Force. And it was good. I mean, when I look back on it, it was not a bad thing. I met some wonderful guys in the Air Force. I learned a lot being in the Air Force. I didn't get a chance to go overseas like I thought I would, so I wasn't happy with that. I ended up, my first duty station was right outside of Detroit, Selfridge Air Force Base. Stayed there for a while, and then they moved me. I thought I was going overseas. They moved me to a base right outside of Milwaukee. I wasn't happy with that at all, because my friends had traveled all over the place. So when I came back, I became a bus driver, CTA bus driver, out on the west side, Kez in Jackson. And that was, it was interesting. Interesting because I grew up on the west side, and I would pull up at the corners and get a load of relatives who didn't want to pay fares. I told you, so you can't do that. I'll lose my job. You got to pay fares. So some of them would pay fares. And then I decided, to go to Crane Junior College. I was a terrible student in high school. I just didn't like it. I was lazy and all that, so I'm a little more mature then. I went to college, Crane Junior College, and I did quite well. In fact, I became the president of the student body because what had happened, I was a little older than a lot of students, because a lot of them just get out of high school, and there were a couple of us like that. But I think what happened, I organized a group of students to study Negro history. We would call Negroes then. And the reason I did that, there was a young lady who came on campus. She gave a lecture on the history of African Americans. I was very impressed. So I decided that we should study, and we would get a room and we would study. We would get books. And so I became a leader because I was the one that organized them. And so they asked me to run for Student Senate President. I ran, and I became Student Senate President. I was still a bus driver. It was something that I didn't really want to do, but I did it anyway. And so it worked out. And I don't want to spend all the time on this. I think I'm saying all this because like I tell the young people in my family, you know, the children who decided not to go to school, who dropped out of school, I tell them, if you dropped out of school, you're a dummy. Drop back in school. And since I'm the only lawyer in the family, some of them listen to me, which is good. American Constitutional Society, thank you for allowing me to get an award. There's a lot of work to be done in various places. Let me share something with you. It's really my wife's story. She's looking at me with, like, what is he getting ready to say? What I want to share with you is I'm still doing civil rights work, and will continue to do that. You know, there are some police officers in communities that need to be sued, and I enjoy suing them and sending them to prison if I can. But this is what's going on. In the last year or so, because I was trying to get reaching out to the United Nations on the issue of torture in Chicago by John Burge, I started getting more into international kinds of things that could happen. So now what we're doing, there's a movement, and some of you are probably aware of it, and some of you will be totally surprised. There's a movement to bring human rights to the cities. How many of you are familiar with human rights cities? I don't see no hands going up. And what that means is the city council in a city, after the people in the communities come together and develop a community group, they would sit down with the city council and help them understand why that city should be a human rights city. And there are several. Boston, Massachusetts, human rights city. And 3 or 4 more, I can't think of them. My wife, she's the leader of this. But they're human rights city. And what that means is this. City council will adopt treaties, and those treaties will become part of how they will approach. For example, how many of you know that the city of Chicago adopted the treaty to protect the child? Nobody? You don't know it because they don't do anything. But they did adopt a treaty. What I was told is there was some lawyers up in Northwestern suggest they adopt a treaty about 8 or 10 years ago. So I said, okay, we'll adopt a treaty. And that was the end of it. When you adopt a treaty, then you find ways to develop ordinances to support that treaty, you know, if you adopt a treaty. So there should be things going on now in Chicago, looking to and finding out what can we do as a city to protect the child. And there are a lot of things to be done. So there's a movement now to bring human rights to the cities. Boston, Massachusetts has adopted it. A number of cities outside of the United States have adopted it. I think Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and others. I don't remember all of them. About 6 or 8 have adopted it, which means that their city council is framing many of their ordinances around certain treaties, like Treaty to Protect the Child. We will bring it to Chicago eventually, count on it, and I hope you all will support it and help us bring it to the city. We need it in the city of Chicago, and they will adopt it. And they will protect, for example, my wife's trying to stop me. Let me finish. Thank you, sweetheart. Isn't that a beautiful way to stop me, to say congratulations? I'll be finished in about 2 seconds. The city of Chicago adopted a treaty to protect the child, And now, if we have a treaty here in Chicago, then they have to do things to protect children. And there's a lot of things to be done. For example, they have juvenile detention homes where they just throw kids away. Some of them in solitary confinement, which is a violation of international law. You can't do that with children. So we're moving in that direction. Hopefully in the next few months we will have convinced. What we do, we meet with people throughout Chicago, develop a committee, in different communities, from the Black community, Latino community, white community, et cetera. And then we sit down with city council and tell them this is what they need to do, adopt a treaty. And since we vote for them in the city, we have some authority to get them to do that. And we said Boston has done it. If you want to see how it works there, go look at Boston. I think Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has done it. There are about 4 or 5. Jackson, Mississippi was in the process of doing it, but they lost the mayor at that time. Chokwe Lumumba passed away. So it's something that I think we should look forward to. I think it would be very helpful in this city or in other cities to have treaties, to adopt international treaties, because the United States has not adopted the treaty to protect the child, but we could adopt it. There's nothing to say that because the country doesn't do it, a city cannot do it, nothing. So let's look forward to doing that. There's a lot of work to be done to protect our children in Chicago and other places. Yeah. Thank you.
This brings our festivities to a close. I'd like to thank our honorees, our board, our sponsors, and all of our attendees today. Most of all, though, I want to bring us back to, again, a bit of reality. This is not a time to sit back and relax. This is a time to work hard to figure out how to move forward towards a world that our children and our children's children will want to live in. This is truly a test of our commitment to what we say we believe. ACS will lead the way, and if you are not yet a dues-paying member, I urge you to become one. As Ab Mikva once said at this luncheon about the American Constitution Society, don't just stand there, join us. It is the people in this room and the people like us across the nation who must work now to save our democracy. This is not a time to underestimate the danger. It is real, it is clear, and it is present. Thank you, and go forward.